A lot of people have been asking me about homeschooling and why we do it and what we've learned, and I decided I'm just going to make a video so that I can share it on all the different outlets, and you can learn from my answers, I guess. So why did we start homeschooling? I started homeschooling because I loved seeing my kids learn, whether it was their first step or their first word, whatever they were learning. I loved seeing that, but on top of that, it wasn't just seeing them learn, but it was learning with them that really piqued my interest. As we would maybe find a bug and look it up and learn more about it, I began to love learning in a whole new way through my child's eyes. As we traveled and things that stood out to them, or they'd remember things that we read in a book, and when they see it out in the real world then. And I just loved learning with them. So as we started having these discussions, my husband and I both thought that for sure our kids would go to public school 100%, but we found something called classical education. And as we discovered classical education, we loved a lot about it, but one of the first things that stood out to us was how a child learns history, not just world history or American history, cultural history, but in classical education, you learn it right along with the Bible. And that was important to us because it was a gap that we felt in our education was kind of separated. I remember as a child, or older, I guess probably, often trying to understand, okay, so I have the myths, the ancient Greek myths and gods and goddesses, where does that fit into what I'm learning in the New Testament? What time period? Like, how does that all work? And what are the connections there? So we love the idea of our kids being able to learn it all together. And I love learning it with them now. So we found classical education, and through that we found Veritas Academy in Leola, Pennsylvania, and we started sending our kids there. We really loved the education there, the people there, how they were learning, the concepts. But again, I still had this urge in my heart to learn with them at home. So ultimately, we ended up taking our kids out of there and doing something called classical conversations at home, which is a classical learning. Why don't I explain classical education a little bit? Because I had no clue what it was, so likely you don't either. So classical education basically looks at how someone learns through three different stages, I'll say. You got the grammar, the dialectic, and the rhetoric. In the grammar stage, it's like your elementary school years. And in classical education grammar stage, it's a lot of defining. It's a lot of creating memory pegs in your brain, and then you're going to pull on that and learn deeper about those later in the dialectic and rhetoric stages. So every week for classical conversations, our kids memorize, and we memorize in fun ways, whether it's to songs or chants or motions, or you're hopping around the room repeating phrases, and they'll memorize definitions of things for science and history and English and Latin and math. Like skip counting. I'll show you some examples of that later. And then in the dialectic stage, a child, if you have a kid this age, you probably notice they start to argue with you a lot. And it's just their way of reasoning and understanding the how and the why. In the grammar stage, they understood the who, what, when, and where, like they're memorizing a sentence about Christopher Columbus in 1492. But now they're starting to ask the why and the how. And it's going to look like they're arguing with you at home, also in their education, but it's how their brain is developing. And this totally makes sense and connects with me. Then once they get to the rhetoric stage, they're starting to apply what they've learned to teach it back, whether it's in writings that they're doing or in like speeches, speaking it out. They're more expressive and creative in using what they've learned and applying that knowledge, turning it to wisdom. They're really owning their knowledge, their education, their faith, and expressing it back. You can think of it kind of like a computer. You have the input in the grammar stages, then you have the processing in the logic stage, and then the output is the rhetoric stage. And what's neat about this is classical education is how we learn whether you identify it that way or not. For instance, if you're going to pick up maybe the hobby of sewing, first you need to learn the definitions of things, like what is a needle, what is a thimble, what is thread, like you name the parts, you're defining things. Then you need to learn how to use the sewing machine, how and why it works, right? And then you start making your pieces, you're sewing your projects. So anyway, maybe I went a little too deep in there, but if you can't tell, I've loved learning about classical education. Ultimately, what it is you're teaching your kids how to think, not what to think. I feel that in my public school education, it was a lot of what to think. I did have a few teachers here and there who would challenge me, and I oftentimes got maybe even a little bit frustrated or mad at them because they asked me questions and didn't give me answers, and they made me think. And yeah, like it's a good thing to go through that stage. So again, teaching kids how to think, not what to think. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about classical conversations. This is a nationwide, in fact, it's worldwide program that began, 20, 30 years ago? I'm not really sure. But we meet 24 weeks throughout the year, once a week. The foundations or the elementary ages is just in the morning for about 2.5 hours. It's broken up into half-hour segments. The first half hour, we learn new grammar, which is what I talked about before. Like we're basically memorizing sentences each week for math, history, science, English, Latin, timeline, and geography. And then and we're doing songs, chants, hopping up and down, different fun ways to memorize things. Then in the next half hour, we do like a science experiment in class. This is nice because moms don't always like doing that at home. And they're based on different topics throughout the 3 cycles. It's a 3-year program. It rotates every 3 years. There's a lot to explain to you here. And then the next half-hour segment, we take kind of like a break. You have snack, and the students each take a turn in their classroom of about 7 to 8 students, and they share a presentation, which is like a show and tell. The younger kids might bring in a toy and talk about it, show about it, and then that's just them learning how to not be afraid to talk in front of groups of people and to just share their information, the who, what, when, where, why. Who, what, when, where. Then the next half hour, we do an art project, and this varies throughout the year. Sometimes it's art and drawing or painting. Other times it is learning about orchestra or playing the tin whistle. I just noticed you can see our tin whistles right over there. Okay, and that's understanding basics of music and notes and rhythms, things like that. The definitions of those things. And then the last half hour is review games. So we take what we learned that week and the week before and the 6 weeks before that, and we play games. It's a fun way to enjoy everything you've been learning and practice it, because if we practice it from week to week, we're going to remember it long term. This is kind of like a celebration for the kids at the end of every day. And then we have lunch. And in the afternoon, the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders are going to do something called essentials. And they stay, and the first 45 minutes, they practice sentence diagramming and grammar, understanding sentence structures in fun ways. And then they do about 30 minutes of math games and drills and fun things just to help get them spitting out math facts quickly. And then the last 45 minutes of that afternoon, which is from like 1 to 3 p.m., is a writing class, and they teach you different ways of modeling writing, whether it's creative writing or writing based on research. I can't go into detail here, but it's really good, really in-depth. They give an opportunity to share their writings with the class, reading them out loud. And a lot of people love this program for boys because oftentimes in that age group you can't get boys to write much, but these writings are based on history. So they can be writing about knights in shining armor and dragons and just all those boy things, and they can write about it. They learn vocabulary here. We only had this 1 year so far with my son in 4th grade. He's going to be in 5th grade this year, but I have absolutely fallen in love with the program. Basically, they go through the same thing for 3 years, but by that last year, they have completely learned everything they need to know and prepare them to go into a much more intense program called the Challenge Years, which they'll start in 7th grade. I'm not there yet, but this is where they delve deeper. They now go for 30 weeks instead of just 24. They're there all day. And it's not a program anymore where the parents sit with the students and learn with them, but they go on their own and you're not with them anymore as a parent. But you're still overseeing their education and their ownership of their education at home those other 4 days of the week. There's so much more I could say about this, but that's probably enough for now. I guess if you want to know more, you can contact me and I can get you more information. Let's see, what have I learned through homeschooling? There's so much I could say here. I would say that keep it simple. Whether you're doing classical or not, I think I would say this. In these elementary years, all we need to be doing is creating a love of learning. That will probably look like you doing some sort of math curriculum with them. Now, I do buy Saxon Math. It's a little more expensive and more in-depth. It's more academic, but I love it. It's what they used at Veritas, and the kids are really learning a lot about. It repeats the subjects, it covers time and basic math skills. I love it and I'm going to continue it. But I think what I'm hesitating here is I think that you would probably be fine just going to the Dollar Tree and getting different math books where if they're practicing like a math sheet every day, they are going to be learning and growing in it. It does not need to be complicated. It does not need to be expensive. You can even sign on to places online and print out worksheets for them, see what they're curious about, learning about, and just make sure you talk to them about normal life then, like bake with them so they learn measurements. Show them a clock and have them say like, what time is it? It's practical math, right? And then along with math, keeping it simple, just reading. If you can get complex phonics programs or spelling programs, but if you're introducing phonics sounds to the little ones and having them practice writing, they're going to learn. It's going to come. Reading to them every day, it might take some longer than others. My kids tend to be later readers than some families. But I think that's the big thing I've learned, is this is a long-term process, but it's going to come. Just encourage them and give them opportunities and read aloud a lot. This has been my absolute favorite thing of homeschooling, is reading aloud. We read tons and tons of books, and don't be afraid to get away from picture books. Even he was probably 3 or 4 years old when I started reading big novels, and my 3 or 4-year-old just loved it, sat there and listened with his older siblings. And we were reading The Princess and the Goblin, which is kind of more complex, like Old English. It was hard for me to read, but they love the story and they're learning the vocabulary as you're reading to them. We then got into this spurt of read alouds that we could then watch the movies for. So what were some of the read alouds that we did, Caleb? White Fang. That one I don't know if I'd recommend for little kids, actually. Peter Pan, Alice in Wonderland, Where the Red Fern Grows, Stuart Little, Charlotte's Web, Trumpet and the Swan. Those are like perfect. Then the other thing, okay, so if you're working on math and read-alouds and character. Elementary years are to grow their character, train them in character, give them opportunities to grow in it, introduce them, read books like hero tales and character virtue books. I have some great examples. Maybe I can put some pictures up here then. Talk about character. Think of as a mom or as a dad, whoever of you is doing the homeschooling, think about a virtue like perseverance all week long and just point out when your kids are persevering. Talk about what persevering is. Talk about what it's not. And then the next week, pick another one, like honesty, and just point it out. Talk about it as much as you can. You can get a Bible or different books and read stories about that, old parables or fables from like ancient literature or Chinese literature has some good ones. I can recommend tons of resources if you want to know more about this. Okay, create a love of learning. This might be, then I would say, don't do science, don't do history. You're going to get your history in your read-alouds. You're going to get your history as you're doing other things and as they get older, right? And for CC's families, you're going to get your history as you're memorizing every week. But for a science curriculum, just get outside, walk around, find bugs, find leaves, draw them, do a journal, talk about them, ask questions. Ask questions, ask questions, ask questions. Because when we ask our kids questions, we're teaching them how to think, not what to think. Let them struggle with answering your questions. Don't give them the answer right away. This is hard for me and my husband. It does not come naturally. You want to give your kids all the answers. Don't do it. And my husband and I have failed at this many, many times. So don't get frustrated with yourself is maybe my next point that I've learned in homeschooling. Give yourself a lot of grace and a break. You're not going to get everything done every day. In fact, some days it will feel like you only addressed character, right? But this is a long-term process. You've got 18 years with them, and they're going to be growing up and learning every day. So, yeah, I guess for science, get outside and explore. Go on nature walks. Go look at flowers. Go to a greenhouse, whatever it is. Have a pet. I'm looking at our fish tank over there. Just learn with them and create a love of learning. This can even look like in crafts. Like in the afternoon, everybody says, well, what do you do if you homeschool in the morning and all your academics are done in the morning? Well, in the afternoon, you do these getting outside things, these drawing, the crafts, learning skills, whether it's sewing or those little hot pad things that they make, or painting, or this is all skills that they're going to learn to love and will equip them. Where do we buy our curriculum? So most of our stuff is CC based. Then we use Saxon for math, and we use the All About spelling program. I like All About reading, but I didn't buy it yet, and my kids are all, for the most part, pretty much reading. But that would be one that I'd recommend. I do get handwriting books just to have them practice the handwriting. You'll find as a mom too that it's good to have some of those things for them to just sit quietly, because if you're like me, you need some silence. And if I can sit them all down for 15 minutes and practice their handwriting or even coloring, something like that where I can just get a few minutes of silence, it is amazing. And I oftentimes buy the curriculum that I'm talking about on Christian book distributors, cbd.com. They have some great sales where they offer free shipping, and they have tons of resources there if you're looking for different art books or activity books. Oh, there is this one, when we're learning our history sentences, sometimes we like to do fun things with it, and we found like these ancient historical figures where you cut them out and you make, like, you put the little tabs in them, and like a puppet The kids loved that. Just extra crafts to reinforce what they're memorizing and creating those memory pegs. Okay, I'm going to call it done. Let me know if you have any other questions. Thanks for listening.
Richard the Lion-Hearted, son of Eleanor of Aquitaine, fought the Turks for Jerusalem during the time of the Crusades from 1095 to 1291. What are some land biomes? Some land biomes are grassland, desert, scrubland, tundra, deciduous forest, coniferous forest, tropical rainforest. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, and 30. Bumbus butt, bumbus butt is bunt, bumbus butt, bumbus butt is bunt. First conjugation in perfect tense. Genghis Khan rules the Mongols. England's Magna Carta. Ottoman Empire. Marco Polo's journey to China. 100 Years' War. And Black Death.